Hi everyone, I just want to share a few thoughts with you about the time when Jacob wrestled with God. But just before, we have a few verses from Genesis where that is, just to keep a couple of things, sayings of the Lord Jesus in mind as we think about it. The first one in John chapter 6 and verse 38, and when the Lord Jesus said, "I am come down from heaven, not to do mine own will, but the will of him that sent me." And the second one is from Matthew 28 when it says, when the Lord Jesus says, "I am with you always, even unto the end of the age." There's two things he says: I am come down from heaven, and I am with you always. God the I am says, I am come down, I am with you. So the story of Jacob wrestling with God, I'm sure might be well known to many of you, and it's in Genesis chapter 32. And I'll just read a few verses. I won't read all the story, but in Genesis 32 from verse 22, it says, "He arose that night," that's Jacob, "and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of Jabbok. He took them, sent them over the brook, and sent over what he had. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, 'Let me go, for the day breaks.' But he said, 'I will not let you go, unless you bless me.'" Now Jacob was a man of God. He was a man who had set his heart to seek the Lord. But he was also a bit of a planner and a bit of a schemer. There was a bit of a twist in his nature, that kind of man. And the Lord had to take that twist out. And it took a long time of working with him until God got him to the point where he was trusting in him and not in himself. And that's what Jacob was like. He was trusting in himself. And we can all be like that, can't we? So the part we've just read, we come into Jacob's experience when he has the problem of meeting his brother Esau. And he left home when his brother Esau had threatened his life and he'd gone off to his uncle's, and he'd worked there for 20 years. And he'd gone through all sorts of a variety of experiences. And now he's on his way home. And it's real crisis time for Jacob. And he's really afraid at the prospect of meeting his brother. Would Esau still be angry? Would he still be after his life? And Jacob's worried. And it says he sent his wives and his children over the brook, and he himself was left alone. And he was waiting. And I think that must have been a really hard thing for Jacob. I think to be alone and to wait. He was the sort of man who had to be busy, it seems, wasn't he? That planner, that schemer. That's the kind of man he was. And he's alone. And he's burdened, and it's this time of crisis for him. And he's waiting. And it says there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. It says the man wrestled with Jacob, not the other way around. And the man was the Lord himself. The Lord before Jesus became a man, as we know him so well in the Gospels. This is a pre-incarnate Lord Jesus who's come down into Jacob's experience. And the Lord came and he wrestled with Jacob that night. Why? I think it's to bring Jacob to an end of himself. He's trying to finally teach Jacob that if he's going to meet Esau and the outcome is going to be for his blessing, then it will not be by Jacob's planning, it will not be by Jacob's might or Jacob's power, but it will be as God works for him. And I think the Lord is wrestling with him to teach him. It's not about trusting in himself, and to teach him to trust in God. I think that's the purpose of the wrestling. God is working with him and has brought him through many experiences. And he wrestles with him until he is finally done. He is finally spent, and he touches his hip, and all his strength was gone, and all the wrestling was taken out of him. And then he could only cling, he could only hold. And he said, "I will not let go until you bless me." And got the blessing that day. The place where this happened was called Peniel, if I'm pronouncing it right, and that the name of that place means face of God, and that is when we get the blessing, when God's face is towards us. You'll probably know the blessing from Numbers 6. If you don't look it up, it's great. It says this: the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And there's really no greater blessing than that, is there? At Calvary, God's face was turned away from his well-beloved Son, and there was no darkness deeper than that. There was nothing in human experience deeper than the experience of the Lord Jesus in those 3 hours on Calvary, when the face of the Father was turned away from the Son, and there is no higher blessing than to know the shining of the face of God. Jacob got it that day. I think that Jacob finally learned his lesson, and his strength was spent, and he got the blessing of God as he had finally learned that it wasn't in himself, it wasn't in Jacob or what he did or in his strength or by his wrestling or his scheming that the blessing of God would come. It was when he was broken. It was when he was spent. It was when he could only cling on. It was then that the Lord would come to him in blessing, rich and full and free. And isn't that right? When we learn that there's nothing in self, but it's all in him. It's all in Jesus, and that's where the blessing comes. The great Master whom we serve has come down from heaven and has come into our experience to be to us all that we need as you and I pass through the experiences of life. The Lord Jesus Christ has promised to come into our experience and to make himself available to us in all the experiences of life. He came down from heaven not to do his own will, but the will of him who sent him. And he wants to come into our experience, into our lives, in all the experiences we pass through. And he wants to come in to bring his blessing. He will be true to the promise he has made. I am come down. I am with you. And that great person is living in our hearts, and the life we now live, we live by faith in the Son of God who loved us and gave himself up for us. Thanks.